Hi, I'm Alex, and today I am about to uncover the Everest climb, where an egoistic mother forced her daughter to summit, and both were later found dead. Driven by arrogance and obsession, she believed money and determination could replace experience and ignored her Sherpa's warnings. What followed was a reckless decision so catastrophic it still haunts everyone who witnessed it. It was May 18th, 2016, a cold, wind-swept morning high on the slopes of Mount Everest. Above the clouds, the mountain's upper ridges stretched into thin, unforgiving air, where climbers moved slowly under heavy gear, as a brief summit window drew teams toward the peak. Mariah Rosal, 46, stood in the lobby of a hotel in Kathmandu, reviewing expedition paperwork with the methodical attention she brought to every business transaction. She carried herself with the controlled confidence of someone used to directing outcomes, her posture straight, her tone measured as she confirmed permits, oxygen allocations, and guide assignments without hesitation. Back in Plano, Texas, she ran an image consulting business built on precision and presentation, and she approached the expedition the same way, less as an uncertain climb and more as a goal to be executed. I can't help but think how driven she must have been. I probably wouldn't be that organized if it were me. Months of planning had gone into securing their spots, shaping a narrative she intended to see through. A successful Everest summit alongside her 19-year-old daughter, Kashieka. The application forms told a carefully edited story. Mariah listed a guided climb of Mount Kilimanjaro in 2013 and a trek to Everest Base Camp the following year, supported by gym logs and photos from weekend hikes in Colorado. While Kashieka's section highlighted recreational running, her first year at university, and those same outings. The gap between casual hiking and real mountaineering went unmentioned, and Kashieka had never really shown interest in Everest until her mom made it a mother-daughter goal. I would probably be freaking out or thinking about whether I really wanted to do something like this. The expedition company accepted clients with varying experience levels if they could demonstrate basic fitness and pay the required fees, a model Mariah had researched in detail, focusing on success rates, oxygen logistics, and guide support. During the pre-trip briefing, she asked precise questions about Sherpa assistance and summit statistics, but when the possibility of turning around was raised, she treated it as routine caution rather than a likely outcome. I can't imagine being that confident in the face of warnings. I'd be second-guessing every decision, but she seemed determined to keep going no matter what. Kashieka remained mostly quiet, a 19-year-old biology student uncertain about her path, aware of the financial commitment and her mother's expectations, and understanding that backing out would create a conflict she had long learned to avoid. The trek from Lukla to base camp took 12 days, following the standard acclimatization schedule through Namche Bazaar, Tengboche, and Dingboche. Maria documented each milestone with photos and journal entries she planned to share on social media, approaching the trek as a challenging but manageable adventure tour. From Namche Bazaar onward, Kashieka struggled with the effects of high altitude. I feel bad for her here. I know I'd be exhausted just walking a few steps at that height. She experienced headaches, nausea, fatigue, and a worsening cough. Her appetite declined, and even simple tasks like organizing gear or walking left her exhausted. She required frequent rest breaks, often stayed in her sleeping bag during rest days, and sometimes appeared mentally dulled. Despite Maria's encouragement and Sherpa support, Kashieka became increasingly vulnerable on technical terrain, needing guidance and supervision during the summit push. Base camp at 17,600 feet introduced a harsher environment. Kashieka continued to struggle with fatigue and reduced appetite, while Maria thrived on the energy of the camp, studying route maps, monitoring weather, and coordinating logistics, confident that her investments in Sherpa support and upgrades would aid their summit push. I would probably be exhausted just trying to keep up and worried about how my partner was doing. Acclimatization rotations through the Khumbu Icefall to Camp 1 at 19,500 feet introduced technical challenges neither had practiced extensively. Kashieka moved cautiously, pausing frequently to check her clipping or catch her breath, while Maria's constant monitoring of her slowed her own progress and disrupted her rhythm. Mariah reacted to this assessment by seeking second opinions from other expedition members and researching altitude sickness symptoms online. She concluded that Kashieka was experiencing normal adjustment challenges that would resolve with more exposure to altitude. When the expedition leader suggested that Kashieka might benefit from spending an extra day at base camp before the next rotation, Mariah argued that maintaining the schedule was more important than accommodating temporary discomfort. A lead climbing Sherpa named Pemba, who had been assigned to work with several expedition members, including Maria and Kashieka, expressed private concerns to the expedition leader. He had observed Kashieka's slow recovery between rotations, her difficulty with technical sections, and her apparent lack of enthusiasm for the climbing itself. It must have been stressful trying to help someone in that condition at such extreme altitude. During a team meeting at base camp, he suggested that Kashieka might want to consider stopping at the South Col if she was not moving strongly by summit night. Mariah's reaction was immediate and defensive. She pointed out the money they had invested, the training they had completed, and Kashieka's determination to reach the summit with her mother. She questioned whether Pemba was being overly conservative and asked to speak with the expedition leader privately about getting more aggressive Sherpa support for the summit push. Kashieka sat quietly during this discussion, occasionally nodding when her mother made points about their preparation and commitment. The weather window for summit attempts opened in mid-May, creating pressure on all the expedition teams at base camp. Mariah monitored weather forecasts obsessively and lobbied for an early position in the summit rotation. She argued that she and Kashieka were ready, and that waiting would only increase the risk of missing their opportunity entirely. I can feel the pressure she must have been under, and it's easy to see how I might get caught up in the excitement and push too hard. On May 20th, the expedition moved to Camp 2 for final acclimatization. Kashieka continued to struggle, requiring assistance with her pack and longer rest breaks. She ate very little and went to bed immediately after the evening briefing. Pemba approached Maria privately that evening to discuss Kashieka's condition. He explained that the summit push would be far more demanding than anything they had done so far, with longer exposure to extreme altitude, colder temperatures, and no opportunity for extended rest. He recommended that they consider having Kashieka wait at base camp while Maria attempted the summit, or that both of them postpone their attempt until Kashieka showed stronger performance. Mariah rejected both suggestions. I can't imagine being in Pemba's shoes here. I'd be freaking out if I were responsible for someone so clearly struggling. She explained that this was a mother-daughter achievement, that Kashieka was stronger than she appeared, and that they had come too far to turn back based on excessive caution. She reminded Pemba that they had paid for full expedition support and expected him to help them reach the summit safely. At Camp 3 on May 21st, Kashieka's struggles persisted. She climbed slowly, needed frequent encouragement, and had difficulty with basic tasks like gear checks and managing her oxygen equipment. Her symptoms suggested early-stage altitude illness. The expedition doctor examined Kashieka again and found her blood oxygen levels lower than ideal, but not immediately dangerous. Her mental state appeared somewhat dulled, but she could answer questions appropriately and expressed willingness to continue. The doctor recommended close monitoring and suggested that any deterioration during the summit push should result in immediate descent. I felt nervous watching her continue, knowing she was already at serious risk and needed constant monitoring. Maria interpreted this assessment as medical clearance for the summit attempt. She spent the evening at Camp 3 reviewing the summit timeline, checking equipment, and discussing logistics with Pemba. Kashieka went to bed early, complaining of fatigue and cold despite the insulated tent and sleeping system. The final move to the South Col at 26,000 feet took place on May 22nd. The South Col was a harsh, windswept plateau that served as the launching point for summit attempts. Multiple expedition teams had established camps there, creating a crowded and noisy environment. The altitude made every activity exhausting, and the constant wind stripped heat from exposed skin within minutes. Maria, by contrast, appeared energized by reaching the South Col. She reviewed the summit route repeatedly, organized her gear with meticulous attention to detail, and discussed timing and logistics with other climbers. I was struck by how different her energy was compared to Kashieka, almost like she was in a completely different world at that altitude. She took photos of the camp setup and made notes for the social media posts she planned to share after the summit. Pemba made one final attempt to discuss Kashieka's condition with Maria. He explained that the summit push would begin around 11 p.m. and require 12 to 15 hours of continuous climbing in extreme conditions. Kashieka would need to move efficiently on technical terrain, manage her oxygen equipment independently, and maintain mental clarity for navigation navigation, and safety decisions. Based on her performance over the past several days, he was not confident she could meet these demands. Maria's response was firm and final. She had invested too much money, time, and emotional energy to turn back at the last moment. Kashieka was tired but determined, and with proper Sherpa support, they would both reach the summit safely. She reminded Pemba that this was their only opportunity, and that she expected him to provide the assistance they had paid for. I felt a knot in my stomach, thinking about how dangerous it must have been to keep going like that. The summit push began from the South Col, with Maria, Kashieka, and Pemba joining climbers from several other expeditions. The route started on a moderate slope, but the extreme altitude made every step a struggle. Climbers moved in single file, connected to fixed ropes, with headlamps casting narrow pools of light that barely pierced the darkness. As they ascended, Kashieka's condition worsened. Her movements became slow and deliberate. Rest breaks grew longer, and she made repeated errors with her equipment. Disoriented and increasingly unable to follow instructions, she required constant supervision from Pemba. Managing both mother and daughter at the same time split Pemba's attention and slowed the group's overall progress. He tried to keep Kashieka moving at a steady pace while repeatedly reminding Maria to focus on her own climbing instead of continuously monitoring her daughter. But the strain on all three was becoming evident. I get why the group fell behind. I think I'd be panicking trying to keep track of even one person in that cold. The route above the South Col included several technical sections where climbers had to navigate steep rock steps and exposed ridges. Kashieka struggled with these obstacles, often needing verbal guidance from Pemba and physical assistance with clipping and unclipping from the fixed ropes. Her movements appeared increasingly uncoordinated, and she began making simple mistakes with her equipment. The group had fallen significantly behind the planned pace. Other expedition teams steadily passed them, and bottlenecks at the technical sections became increasingly severe. Climbers were forced to wait in the biting wind, standing exposed on narrow ridges while managing their ropes and equipment with trembling hands. The cold gnawed at their fingers and faces, making even simple adjustments laborious. Maria's frustration grew as delays mounted, and she began urging for faster progress. Despite Kashieka's obvious difficulties navigating the terrain, Kashieka struggled to maintain her balance and rhythm, pausing frequently and leaning heavily on her trekking poles. Her breathing was uneven and labored, and simple questions from Pemba seemed to take extra effort to process. She hesitated over every step, fumbling with her equipment, and her movements became increasingly uncoordinated. It was clear that the extreme altitude, exhaustion, and cold were straining her ability to focus and manage even basic climbing tasks. I can feel how terrifying it must have been to watch someone fight just to keep moving in conditions that harsh. When Pemba checked her oxygen system, he found that her mask was not sealing properly, likely due to ice forming around the regulator. Fixing it required removing her gloves in the freezing air, exposing her hands to frostbite risk. The repair process dragged on for nearly 20 minutes, leaving Kashieka visibly weaker, disoriented, and struggling to regain her footing as she continued up the ridge. Maria watched this repair process with growing anxiety. She calculated that they were now several hours behind schedule, and that their oxygen supplies were being depleted faster than planned. When Pemba suggested that they should turn around immediately while descent was still manageable, Maria argued that they had come too far to quit and that Kashieka just needed more time to recover. The traffic jam above the balcony proved worse than expected. Multiple expedition teams were stacked up on the fixed ropes, creating delays of 30 to 45 minutes at each bottleneck. Climbers stood exposed to the wind and cold while waiting their turn, burning oxygen and losing body heat without making progress. I can see how impossible it must have been to make progress while standing exposed to the wind and cold, losing oxygen with every minute. Pemba urgently urged Maria and Kashieka to turn back, warning that Kashieka's deteriorating condition and their delayed schedule made a safe summit impossible. Maria refused, insisting they were close and could finish with Sherpa support, citing their investment and commitment. Kashieka, following her mother's lead, showed little awareness of her own condition, responding slowly and inappropriately at times. By dawn, she was moving painfully slowly, requiring constant supervision and creating delays that endangered the group. Maria, worn down by the altitude, stress, and relentless physical exertion, began struggling to manage her own movements and equipment. I feel so helpless just imagining being there. I don't know how anyone could save them in that moment. On the exposed southeast ridge, Kashieka suddenly collapsed onto the fixed rope, her oxygen mask dislodged and her breathing shallow and irregular. Pemba was left in a dire situation, facing the near impossible task of trying to stabilize and rescue her on the steep, unforgiving terrain. Pemba and several other climbers attempted to assist Kashieka, checking her oxygen flow, repositioning her mask, and trying to encourage her to move. She responded minimally to their efforts, efforts and seemed unable to coordinate her movements effectively. Her condition suggested severe altitude illness, hypoxia, or complete exhaustion. Maria tried to assist Kashieka, but the altitude, cold, and exhaustion quickly overwhelmed her. Her movements grew unsteady, and she struggled to grasp the urgency of Pemba's instructions to begin immediate descent. I can only imagine how impossible it must have been to think clearly and act fast in conditions like that. Lowering Kashieka down the ridge in stages proved slow and dangerous, and the stress of watching her daughter collapse further drained Maria. Within minutes, she too collapsed roughly 200 feet below Kashieka, unable to continue or manage her own equipment, leaving both women incapacitated on the exposed ridge. The location of both collapses, at approximately 27,500 feet on technical terrain, made rescue extremely difficult. The altitude prevented helicopter evacuation, and the steep exposed route made it nearly impossible to carry incapacitated climbers. Pemba and other expedition members faced the reality that they could not save both Maria and Kashieka while ensuring their own survival. The decision to leave both women on the mountain was made based on the fundamental limitations of high-altitude rescue. Multiple climbers and Sherpa staff confirmed that neither Maria nor Kashieka was responsive to revival attempts, that moving them would require resources that could endanger the entire rescue team, and that the weather and daylight conditions were deteriorating rapidly. The expedition reported both climbers overdue when they failed to return to the South Col within the expected time frame. Climbers descending later that day confirmed the locations of both bodies on the southeast ridge. Recovery operations were delayed by altitude, weather conditions, and the extreme danger to recovery teams working above 27,000 feet. The subsequent investigation, based on statements from Pemba, other expedition members, and nearby climbers, established a consistent timeline of events. Both Maria and Kashieka died from complications related to extreme altitude exposure, including severe altitude illness, oxygen deprivation, exhaustion, and cold exposure. It's kind of depressing, but I guess this really shows how dangerous Everest is. I never thought about it being this brutal before. The deaths resulted from a series of decisions to continue climbing despite deteriorating conditions and missed opportunities for safe descent, rather than from any single equipment failure or natural disaster. Looking back, it's clear that Maria's decisions drove the outcome. She pushed her daughter beyond what was safe, ignored warnings, and prioritized reaching the summit over their well-being. The tragedy was preventable, and it came down to her choices, not just the mountain or bad luck.